Oh, it says live now.
Okay. Well, thank you for watching another episode of the G3 Project podcast. And today I'm Lisa Fields, the founder of the G3 Project. I forgot to introduce myself. And today I'm joined by a very special guest, Esau Mccaulley. Welcome, Esau.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for agreeing to be on. Before we went live, I was talking to you about why we wanted to talk about this subject of research. Our last episode, we had Brother Berean, and he talked about the importance of understanding research when we deal with Black cults. So we thought it was important to help our listeners and viewers understand how to do research. And I thought you would be the perfect person because you're not only a professor, but you're in the final leg of your dissertation. So
Yes.
if anybody is connected to research, you right now, because
Yes.
You have a dissertation that's going to be viewed by other department heads that are going to really critique your work. So
Yes.
You've been in the thick of it, and you critique your students who write papers for you. So I thought you would be a good person to talk about it. So for those who don't know who you are, could you just give a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I am Esau Mccaulley. I'm from Huntsville, Alabama. I was raised in the Black Baptist Church in the South. Now I'm actually an Anglican priest. I'm finishing a PhD in New Testament at the University of St. Andrews under the direction of N.T. Wright. I currently work at Northeastern Seminary in Rochester, New York, where I teach New Testament and early Christianity. I'm married, and we have 4 wonderful kids: Luke, Claire, Peter, and Miriam. So I think
awesome. Awesome. So I'm excited to have you to discuss this topic. Before we hit live, we were talking just about this whole idea of research. What do you think some of the misconceptions about research for those who get these facts online or from art pieces?
I think that, and this is hard to say without sounding arrogant, but I think it's hard for people to understand what it really takes to become an expert on something. And the patience and the solitude and the depth of what it really means to come to grips with the topic. So if you want to say, for instance, you want to learn about, like I'm teaching a class next year on Ephesians, and I'll probably read 10 to 15 commentaries all the way through on Ephesians. I'll probably translate it through multiple times. I'll read as many journal articles as I can. And that's just to begin to get my head around the topic. And so you'll almost never find me come to a conclusion about anything in like a day, a week, or a month. If it's a topic that's really worth my time and it's going to affect my life and the way that I live and function as a Christian, then it's a long process to come to an understanding on something. And so I think that given how quick our culture moves, the life of a scholar the life of Christian intellectualism is actually a lot slower than our culture moves. And so I think one of the things that people have to really keep in their head is like, what does it really take? What does it really mean to know something? And so I can talk to you about what the process would look like if you want me to.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Okay, so say for instance, I wanted to come to a conclusion on, let's say, Galatians chapter 1. The first thing I would do is I would read through Galatians chapter 1 in the Greek, translate it, do text criticism, analyze the text, find out the earliest and most original reading. I would then from there go and look at any uses of the Old Testament in Galatians chapter 1. I would analyze those. I would look at that in its Greek and in its Hebrew. And then after that, after I got my understanding of what I think the Galatians says, then that's the beginning of the journey. Now there's been 2,000 years of Christian history where people have written about Galatians. And I need to know what everybody said from around 300 AD all the way up to 2000. For instance, I'm now getting ready to turn in my dissertation, and I stopped doing research in August when I started my new job. And what I'm having to do before I turn this in February, I have to read all of the stuff that I missed from August till now, which is 3 articles and a book. And that's in just like those few months.
Mhm.
And so after I've said, this is what people have said about Galatians for 1700 years, right? There's probably 10 or 11 views. And then I say, here are the 10 or 11 views that people have said. What evidence do they posit for their beliefs? Okay, so like this is view 1. What are their evidences? What evidence they have for their belief, and how valid is it? And then I have to critique not just the total idea, but the supporting evidence for each one of those. And after I've done all of that, and I have something new to say, which is rare, most of the time somebody has gotten it right along the way. That guy from 1975, he had it right. He just got this part wrong. And so it is rare, really rare, to have something genuinely new that no one's ever said before. And anytime someone comes to me and says, I have an interpretation nobody's ever seen, you're either a genius or a heretic. And the odds are you're a heretic. And the odds are, not only are you a heretic, you're not even a good heretic, because most heresies are from something else, right? So like most of them are Arians. I can say, oh yeah, someone got that wrong 500 years ago. And so that's kind of at least how I do research. I get my own understanding. I go through 2,000 years of church history. I analyze all the different views that have kind of been put out there. And then I try to either add my own fresh spin on something that's been said before, or every now and then we break new ground. So I think that at least, and I guess you couldn't expect a layperson to do that, but that's at least kind of how a scholar does research.
And I think that's important and helpful, because there's people who read a little bit of something and develop an argument, like I was saying before. And you mentioned to me that for one chapter in your dissertation, it took you reading through 1,000 books.
I mean, it's impossible for me to. I have no idea if 1,000 is the right number. I have no idea. It's honestly, at this point, it's just, who knows? I know that I can say that my bibliography is currently just 22 pages. It'll probably end up being somewhere between 25 to 30 pages of just, these are all of the works that I've worked with. And that's with me chopping. 80,000 words is the word limit. So it's not like it's a long book. They limit you to 80,000 words. And so how many books I read, I might sit down and count them all one day, but it's 3 years of 7 a.m., 8 a.m. till 6 o'clock at night, all day, every day, even on Saturdays. And that's just for and this is not special to me. Anyone who's at a reputable program who has done a PhD has spent a significant portion of their life studying one thing very intently. And it's not just what I've learned about Galatians. It's about what it takes to actually know something and get your hands around it and see all the different sides of the issue. And what I learned is that our instincts are often not always correct. And even some of the reasons why we might believe something, like so we might hold to a truth of something that is true, but we might have had bad arguments. And what I've learned that if we're patient with Christian orthodoxy, we will often find our way to the truth. And what tends to happen is that people give up too quickly. They read 1 or 2 good arguments against something, and then they kind of say, well, what I've always been taught is wrong. And I always ask them, well, what have you actually read? And so the question, like, what do we read? And I don't want to say like, I don't want to talk bad about my church, because I love my church, but we didn't read anything but the King James Bible and those little thin like Bible study like guides. But we didn't have any real in-depth theological analysis to prepare us to really deal with any arguments. I mean, Mormons would come to our door and we would just say Jesus. We didn't know any of that stuff. We just like, I'm not here for Mormonism, but we didn't really have like arguments. And so I would say, like, if all you've ever done is read your King James Bible and listen to the occasional sermon, you are not equipped to analyze and, or in most cases, even defend what Christians have historically taught. There's too much information out there that you're just most likely not aware of. And so I would say it's important for us to actually be well-read in our own tradition, and that would help us not be so easily swayed by the stuff that we see.
Mhm. For those who are watching and listening, what would a short version of a step-by-step guide to doing research for, I don't want to say specifically for just the Bible, but when we go to church history, because there's all these kinds of conspiracy theories around councils, specifically the Council of Nicaea. And so, you know, you have to start with credible sources in order to research so you won't get swayed. For a person who's watching and doesn't know the steps and their first inclination is just to go to Google and Google it, how would you recommend a step-by-step guide for them to do research?
I would find a reputable Bible dictionary or a biblical encyclopedia, and I would just read the entry on the topic. So let's say you want to talk about the atonement, or you want to talk about the Trinity. Just go to and get like a 1 paragraph, 1 page, very simple explanation of the topic. So if you don't know anything about it, don't go to Google. Just find like Erdman's Bible Dictionary or Dictionary of Classical Theology, and just read the paragraph on it. And that'll give you a beginning point. And a lot of times at the bottom of those paragraph entries, it'll have "see these works." Read those, and basically what you should do is it sounds simple, but you start with short stuff, and then you read and read and read and read and grow until you've satisfied yourself. So some people say, I'll go from a short book, a short paragraph into the atonement, and then I'll find maybe it'll direct me towards an article. Then you read a 15-page article on the atonement. Okay. Now I've been introduced to some of the other ideas. From that, you go to a short book, maybe 100 to 150 pages. And then if you're a boss, you want to be a gangster, then you start saying, what are the classical works on this, right? And after you've read those things, you'll see in the footnotes and in the bibliography, it'll always say, for more information, see. And what you can do is you can grow from there out into it. It's not hard to find the classical works on any given topic. So for instance, if you don't know anything about theology, there's a book called, I think it's Christian Theology by Alistair McGrath. And that book will give you the basic history, and it's like right down the middle. It'll give you the basic history on what Christians have always taught and said, and it'll have resources that'll direct you in a bunch of different directions. And the same thing is there's kind of a basic introduction to the New Testament and a basic introduction to the Old Testament and an introduction to the letters of Paul. Any of those introductory works will give you an orientation and then direct you further. And you can go from there forward. So start small, work towards introductions, and then work towards specialized literature. That's how I would do research if I didn't know about something.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's helpful. In addition to that, when we're talking about historical sources, and we're reading books, what are books that we could look at and say, how can I be able to make a distinction between a reliable book and an unreliable book? Okay. A reliable source and one that's it's well researched, and then a book that just somebody wrote and self-published and it's out there. Or I've been in a debate. I wasn't personally in a debate. I went to a debate, and it was like a guy who led this Black cult and a Christian, and they were talking on a HBCU campus. And when they asked the guy who was in the Black cult, I can't remember what it was, which particular one. He was listing sources, and he was like, "This is credible because it's in the Library of Congress." And I'm like,
okay, then I might have to show my Southern roots, right? I'll give you a perfect analogy. Okay. So I'm from like the South in the mid-'90s. In the mid-'90s, anything that came out of Dungeon Family, Outkast, Goody Mob, all those people, you said, okay, this is a Dungeon Family. We know it's going to be on, right? And so you could tell by the label, right? This back on the labels and stuff. By the label, you could say, okay, I'm going to buy this. But then if it was from like a whack label, like my grandma records, you're like, I don't even know this label. I don't know these producers. They're probably whack. Right? And every now and then, you're like, oh, he's an independent artist and he's coming up. But most of the time, you can say, stick with LaFace, So Def, So it's actually the same in publishing, right?
Mhm.
If you are not at a university press, right? That's one place to say, is this a university press? Oxford, Cambridge, Baylor. If a university looked at your manuscript and said, I will publish it, that means other people with PhDs whose job it is to do quality control, they saw it. If it is random press, like there's not attached to a university, it's not, you never heard of it, right? Then the odds are they sent that manuscript to all of those other people, just like you see your mixtape, and nobody wanted it, right? And then you got, and so I would say, if this scholarship isn't from a major press, then it's probably not reputable. Now, there's some other stuff with that. Just because a university press publish it, it doesn't mean that it's right. It just means that it's scholarly. You could be scholarly and wrong, right? So, but at least you met the standards of academia. And so, and the other thing you can kind of say is that there's, at least within Christian circles, there's also publishing companies that have a history of being somewhat orthodox. So IVP, Erdman's, I can't think of the other ones now. I can't think. Those are the two. Just so like places that Christians tend to publish their books. Zondervan. And so if this is just stuff that's just like completely out of left field and is not attached to a university, then the odds are it's not going to be reputable. The other question is, who do they interact with? So if you read a book and you say, okay, then what kind of sources do they cite? Do they cite other university presses? Do they cite well-known leaders in the field and interact with them? So for instance, and I'm not even trying to be like arrogant, if you're writing a New Testament book, I mean, a book about Pauline theology, and you don't interact with N.T. Wright, right? And you don't interact with any of the other scholars who are leading the day, but you're like yelling at some pastor, then you're not really doing scholarship, right? You're just doing polemics. And so the question is, are they engaging in the best presentation of Christianity, or are they engaging in a caricature? So for me, if I wanted to criticize Islam or like Black Muslims, I'm going to find the best representation of what they say. This is the best possible version of a 5%er argument, and then I'm going to critique it, right? I don't just say all 5%ers are stupid and here's 15 reasons why. I was like, and so what I tend to see in books or in articles, do they actually present what Christians teach, or do they teach something else? I saw some person, I think it was like, is it Kemet or something like that?
Kemet, Egyptologist.
Yeah, she got on there, and God bless her, right? Bless her heart. She started saying, like, I'm tired of these Christians saying God won't give you anything you can't handle. But then she gave to this 15-minute defense on like why the idea was stupid. That's not a principle of Christian theology. It's a catchphrase, right? So like, why you spend 15 minutes of your time arguing with the Christian catchphrase instead of like coming to the heart of what Christianity teaches about the world? And so one of the ways you can analyze criticisms, are they critiquing the heart of Christianity, or do they have some secondary, like popular version that they're mad about, that they're now yelling at?
And that's a good observation, because if you're just like you mentioned, the young lady who was critiquing a catchphrase or a cliche of God won't put more than you can bear, but then you see Paul talking about he had more on him than he could bear.
Yes.
And he thought he was gonna die. So I always say that God will put more than you can bear, but he'll never put more on you than he can bear. And I think that's a better reflection of the character of God than some of our catchphrases. So I think that was an excellent point that you drawn out. Another question I have for you is, how do people understand primary and secondary sources in research, and how do we use those? Because both are necessary, but sometimes people don't necessarily understand how it works in scholarship.
Okay, if I want to say what Lisa said, right? If I'm coming for Lisa, I'm coming for Jude 3, and I want to take down your ministry. What I don't do, what I don't do then is I don't go and say what somebody else said about Lisa. I quote Lisa herself. And so I analyze Lisa's own words. That's a primary source. A primary source is when you're dealing with an argument, you're dealing with what the person actually wrote or said. So if you want to analyze Paul's theology, or if you want to talk about Genesis, a primary source is a direct engagement with that source. And a secondary source is someone talking about what the primary source says. And so anytime someone's argument is based upon a bunch of secondary sources, rather than dealing with their primary source, then it's apt. A lot of the times, if you just go and say, wait a minute, they're saying that the Bible says that. Well, where does the Bible say that? People say, well, the Bible says this, but the truth is that. You go, well, where is that actually in the Bible? And if you go back to that actual text, 9 times out of 10, they're wrong. Because let me tell you something. It's not easy to become a biblical scholar. That's the reason why you have people who do a PhD in Old Testament and a PhD in New Testament. And with the New Testament, they tend to say, I'm going to do Paul or the Gospels. And so people just go, the Bible says, the chances are they haven't read the Bible. If they read the Bible, they haven't put all the different pieces together in context. And so when you talk about a primary source, it's the patient return to the text. What does the Bible actually say? What does the Council of Nicaea actually say? Because you know what you can do? You can literally Google Nicaea and read the documents. So there's a conspiracy in Nicaea. Where? Where?
Have you read the documents from the Council?
Yeah, I got it. Look, this I think it was, I forget, it's the Mormon of Jehovah's Witness. He came to me at Starbucks and he had met the wrong dude, right? So he started talking to me about what John 1:1 says about the identity of God. I said, hold on, buddy, I got the Greek here. We can go through the text. I have the manuscript evidence. Let's talk about it. And it's rare that they actually know the primary sources. They know what they've been told to say about the primary sources. So it's like, if you're a Christian and you know the Bible, say, let's walk through this passage. As a matter of fact, let's say you write about this passage. What about these 15 other passages that speak about Jesus' divine identity here? Okay, let's put this to the side. And so I guess the question is, when you're dealing with issues of primary and secondary literature, it's an argument that is oftentimes constructed in a reality that's separate from what the text actually says. And Christianity is not afraid of history. We can return to the sources because the evidence is on our side. What are they saying? I don't even know. Like, it's funny because this stuff doesn't even come into our arena. So what are they saying about Nicaea? What's this conspiracy?
That's a good question. I haven't run into a conspiracy theories about Nicaea. It was something that Brother Berean mentioned that he encounters, but my context is different. So I'm in the deep South, so I don't encounter it. He's in New York, so our context is different. So I don't come in contact with a lot of them. I do every now and then, but I know that they're ever changing as far as their conspiracy theories as it relates to it. So I wouldn't be sure I think it's something to do with oppression, but I don't want to quote it wrong.
Yeah, I know everybody want to make people they've been coming for Black people forever.
But it's this whole idea with people not knowing the right history or knowing where to get a credible source. Something that I did research this weekend was there were 2 scholars in kind of this thought of the Black man being the original man, the Egyptologist, and all the Moors, and a leader in the Pan-African movement. And when I looked back at his bio, I looked and saw that the New York Times had ran after he passed, had ran an article saying that they called, I think it was Cambridge, where he had planned to go to school, and they said they had no record of him ever attending, and all of his books were self-published, and so people were using these books as kind of guides, and then when you go back and research and
Yeah.
look at his sources, they're quoting each other so-called scholars, and then another guy researched. He had his PhD from a place that didn't even ever exist. It was like,
see how they do? See how they do? See how they do? What what I was going to say is, one other thing that you can do is that when you look on any given topic, so for instance, you have to do, it's called a history of research, right? So before you're allowed to comment on something, you have to go through and say, these are all the topics. What you can do is, you can go and look at the history of research on Egypt and see if the crazy theory is even mentioned as an option. And most of the time, it's not even mentioned as an option. So not only is it wrong, it's so wrong that people don't even take the time to say that it's wrong. You know what I mean? And so it's really hard.
There's no scholarly research done on it because nobody took it.
No, and so what you tend to find is that if a view isn't even considered in the research, oftentimes it's because they've never submitted their proposals to real scholarly critique. So when my book is published, anyone who has a interest in New Testament scholarship, there'll be book reviews. And they'll say, Esau was wrong about this, this, and this, because I've now submitted myself to public review. To be honest, I don't go like directly to, and so if you don't do that and you're kind of going around it and you're not submitting yourself to people who are experts in the field, and you're sounding impressive to people who don't really often aren't informed on all the topics, that's kind of a cheap way of establishing yourself. If you want to be considered a scholar, you have to submit your stuff to public review by sending it to journals, sending it to university presses, and sending it to reputable publishers. That's what you do if you care about presenting your ideas to the public and taking the time to make sure it's properly vetted. It's the same way when people do the same stuff with medicine, right? My wife is a pediatrician, and it drives her crazy when these folks are talking about all of these things about vaccines and all this other stuff. But she goes, you don't have a medical degree. You Googled like 2 herbs and you put like a leaf on your profile picture and you call yourself an herpetologist, and now it's kids in her pediatric department with rashes because their parents have put together their own organic way of dealing with it. And the funny thing about it is when the kids get sick, they go to real doctors. And it's the same thing, right? So like, it's one thing to say, I'm going to dabble in scholarship, but it's another thing to take the time to become knowledgeable. And it doesn't mean that you have to have a PhD. It means you have to be patient enough to read and really come to an informed decision. If you take a PhD to know something, then we'd be in real bad shape, because that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is it takes patience and wide reading.
Yeah. And reading information that's not just just not a book that you said it was in the Library of Congress, because I mean that's a lot of books. So I think this has been helpful for people who are trying to learn, engage, and I want to encourage our those who are viewing us to really look at the credentials of the person you are reading. Make sure that they actually, if they say they have a PhD, then you start looking at the schools they have it from and see, is this actually a school? Is it like an actual reputable university, before you take their research as valid? Because if they're lying about where they went to school, or if the school never existed, if they're lying about where they went to school, it's a chances that they're lying about what's in that book as well. So those are just some common sense things we could put into practice. Don't just see the letters behind the name, but research the letters behind the name, because that's the way you can really kind of avoid error in that way.
Yeah, and can I say like send a shout out to pastors? Like, be patient with your pastors. I mean, don't automatically assume just because the person, I'm assuming if you have a Bible loving, Jesus following pastor, sometimes it's their job to be read and to be informed. And just because they don't have, sometimes our itching ears want to hear new things. And just because your pastor tells you the same thing is true, it doesn't mean that you should automatically abandon it. And I should also say one other thing. Like, we have to be careful about how our desire leads our interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
If we want to sin, oftentimes, right, we will follow the piece of advice that allows us to do what we want. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
not that we come to this text with these neutral, like, I don't really care which one is true, right? And then we
Mm-hmm.
analyze it. We're actually, our natural bent is to abandon Christian orthodoxy, because when we do, that gives us the freedom to do what we want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we always have to recognize, like, what do I want to believe because of my own desires, and how is that informing my reading of the text? And so not only do we have to be careful of the motives of other people, we have to be careful of our own motives. We have a vested interest in the interpretation of these texts, and it impacts how we live. And so what I'm saying is, like, sin, Jesus said, in the Old Testament, the Cain, like, sin's desire is for you, but you must master it. And so it's the deceptive desire of sin that oftentimes leads us to false interpretation. It's called the noetic effect of sin, how sin influences our knowing. And so it's, yes, look at all of these sources, but sometimes sometimes we know deep in our hearts this stuff ain't true. We know it's not true, but we want to be foul. Because oftentimes it's not arguments that brings us back to the truth. Oftentimes we see the consequences of our actions, and then we go, you know what? I knew this wasn't true anyway. I need to quit tripping and go back to church. So save yourself
unrighteousness.
Yeah. So I'm just saying, like, I understand that we have to talk about the resources and all that other stuff, but I'm, like, in some sense traditional in saying, like, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, your pastor, and check your own desires. So
yeah, I think that's good, because you see, when the New Testament talks about false teachers, you see the connection between their life that's been tainted by sin and false teaching. So they tend to coincide. When I go and do what I want to do and then try to look at scripture, I'm kind of going to find a loophole. Try to find a loophole for myself.
Because people will keep finding arguments until they find it. Okay, that's a whack argument. That's a whack argument. That's a whack argument. Okay, this was plausible. Well, why did you go through 5 different versions? Because you were looking for a way out. Right? You kept looking until you found one argument that worked, because you wanted to leave anyway. I remember, and I know you got to go, I had this conversation with this dude one time, and we talked for like 3 hours. We went through apologetics, church history, theology. I'm talking about everything. He's not a believer, right? So it's about 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm still in college. He says to me, so you trying to say if I become a Christian, I got to stop sleeping with my girlfriend? I was like, we didn't even say anything about your girlfriend. But that's what was in your mind the whole time. We hadn't mentioned anything about relationships, anything. But in the back of the mind, as you listening to church history and theology, you're thinking about what you're going to do on Saturday. I said, if that's the case, you could have saved me 3 hours. Right? And so what I'm saying is, like, we can't pretend like these theological arguments are purely theological, and there's not always an emotional, psychological, or spiritual thing. And some of it is even driven by anger. I'm sorry, like, I understand churches treat people foul, and people have bad experiences in churches. And because they have bad experiences in churches, they begin to think that Christianity, Christian theology is false. And underneath all of that stuff, it's not just problems with church or Jesus as a person, it's problem with how church has treated them. And what we have to do is to process this. Like, am I reading this because I'm mad at my pastor because he or she was a jerk to me when I was a kid, or am I really persuaded by the evidence? And so we really have to get to the heart of not just doing analysis of other people. We have to analyze ourselves and who we are and what we bring to the text.
Yes, I think that's excellent. I think that's a great way to end the conversation.
I've talked you to death.
Oh no, you're great. I think this is very helpful because you helped us understand both perspectives, not just the scholarly perspective, but the spiritual perspective. And, both of those are very helpful in looking at how we interact with people in a balanced way. So I'm very grateful for that contribution. How can people get connected to you or reach out to you? Your social media handles, is there a website?
Man, ain't nobody worried about me. I guess I'm on Twitter, but I don't tweet that much. It's Esau Mccaulley. I guess at Twitter, that's how you do it.
It would be at Esau Mccaulley.
I do that.
You sound like I am about Snapchat. I don't know what's going on.
I'm 37 years old. I'm not here for that Snapchat. I'm grown. What else? I do have a blog that I write for whenever I have time. It's called The Thicket of the Jordan. And so people can look for that, thicketofthejordan.wordpress.com. Come to seminary. Come to Northeastern Seminary. Get a D-Min. Pull yourself together. Google us for that, or if you want, you can get like an MA or MDiv. So, but just in general, I would rather have them pray for me because I got to turn in my dissertation in 2 weeks. So they're looking for
that Dr. Esau.
Yeah, they should be interceding for me. So I don't know how. I don't know. I'm the only Esau Mccaulley that exists in the world except for my dad. So if you Google me, I'm easy to find. That's probably the easiest way. If you get anything close to Esau Mccaulley, I'll come up.
Would you like to add anything else before we close that you think would be helpful?
I hope that more African Americans seriously consider the life of a scholar. I know when people go to seminaries, most of the time there are very few Black faces. And I hope that, especially in the core disciplines of New Testament, Old Testament, and systematic theology. Sorry, folks calling me. And I would really hope that people would do that. And I would say, please, please, please keep supporting Jude 3. When I heard about it, I said they have a Black woman doing apologetics. I said, well, praise Jesus. I was so excited about it. And I want to encourage you, because I think that what you're doing, besides having me on, is really important. It is really helpful, and I pray that it continues to grow and expand. And I hope that people will see like what happens when God gives you a vision to do something and you pursue a faithfulness. And so, if God puts something on y'all heart to do, because there's not a lot of African American public intellectuals from a traditional theological perspective, the more of those, the better. Get your degrees now, but please, 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 please. More of them, but especially if you have questions about that, I'd be happy to chat with you offline. I'm like really big and trying to help connect people with higher education and getting involved if they want to. So thank you. Keep working hard, Lisa.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
All right. Well, I'll talk to you later.